the next step for us now, and I'm only showing you with these ones in particular right here, and then I'm going to release you to finish up the rest of the cube. That's your challenge. So it's pretty simple, but now we're introducing a couple of other more abstracted concepts that you should be aware of. The way that surfaces behave. Surfaces in Rhino behave both equally as intelligent as they are dumb, which is really confusing. But what that means is that when they're grouped together, they have really wonky behaviors. So what I mean by grouped behavior is that this is an object. It's a cube. There are 6 surfaces that are joined together into one, if you could call it a family. It's a family. We need to modify that family, but for some reason Rhino, when it has a complete solid form, because it's not solid, and I'm doing the quotation hand marks for those of you who are watching the video, it doesn't like to break that solid form very easily. However, when you've already got it split up, it's actually quite easy. However, or I'm using however too much. Also, when you happen to have solid geometries and solid geometries together, it tends to behave a little bit better. So for us, because we happen to place these exactly on the surface and everything's all well and good, we know that these edges of these forms are coincident with the edge of the original cube. We can use those directly to subtract. If we wanted to create thickness, a wall thickness on this, like you see in the cube here, it gets a little bit more complicated. So what I'm going to do is modify this surface with the arrayed forms. Then I'm going to create thickness. And then I'm going to show you why it doesn't work with the other form. Yeah. Well, maybe I'll hold on. Maybe I'll hold off on that one to another unit. Let's work on just your flat surface, and then we'll go into the offset surface. So anyway, what that looks like is you have a couple of options at your disposal to manipulate geometry. You can trim, you can cut, split, or you can do a Boolean, what's called a Boolean difference, and that looks like this. That's where the difficulty lies, is that the more powerful tool for you is Boolean difference, because it takes solids, because nothing in Rhino is truly a solid, and subtracts negative geometry from it. And that's what we've created, negative geometry. So let me turn on visibility settings here so you can see what's going on. If I do a Boolean subtract, it looks like this. Boolean menu is, or the Boolean tools rather, on the menu are right here. Oh, that's me. Sorry. So the Boolean menus are right here. You can cascade it out and see all the different options. The first 4 are probably the only 4 that we're really going to focus on in this class. And it's sort of more advanced, but you need to know about Boolean difference now. So Boolean difference is right here. It's the second one. And it asks you for this. It asks you for the surface, or polysurfaces, right? So polysurfaces meaning that I've got multiples in one. That's what this is here. It's a polysurface. I guess technically it's an extrusion, but it's all the same the way it computes. But to subtract from. And you have to read these carefully because they're in order. You need to select a particular one first. So the surface to subtract from would be the original cube. That's this. And then you have to hit enter to continue. Enter. Then it says select the surfaces or polysurfaces, could be plural, but I'm only doing one, to subtract with. And that's this. So now you think, because it's not truly solid, like I keep saying, it's just going to cut out the edge of the surface and then you can see inside. Well, that's not the case. Rhino tries to emulate the behaviors of a solid form when it is computing a solid, with quotations, object. Right? So this happens to be a box that is a continuous surface that is closed. So it behaves like a solid. Now, if I was to take off the bottom surface, for instance, so let me do that for you. It's a poly surface. I can explode it. So you type in explode and hit enter, and it breaks it apart into separate surfaces. And then I delete the bottom one. And then I go ahead, oh, and let me talk to you real quick about multiple selections and adding stuff. If I select one object and I want to add another selection to it, I can hold shift and click. If I want to deselect an object, it's control and click. Okay, so shift click, shift click, shift click, shift click. Type in join to make them a continuous surface again. So now when I select it, it's one object. So additionally, I want to make it kind of clean. Well, I'll talk about that one later. Anyway, so now I have, see how this is not really solid? All I did was just explode the surfaces, and I took one out, and it's not solid at all. So if I do a Boolean difference now, grab a Boolean difference, I select the surface to subtract from, that's this, the one to subtract with, that's that, it still does it. Sorry. So what you want to do in that case is use split. So split is going to take surfaces. You select the object you want to split, and that's this one, and then you select the cutting object, and that's that. And let me turn off that layer real quick so you can see what truly happened. So rather than actually cutting out and carving out that space, it split the individual surfaces. So if I delete those, now you've got a hole in it. So, yeah, I'll go back. So now it is still a family of individual surfaces, but for visibility's sake, let's look through this as we cut it. The command is split, and rather than trying to create a difference of apparent solids, it's actually going to take the surfaces and strictly cut it with other surfaces. So it might be a little bit easier to understand if I take this extrusion and move it out, maybe. Let me turn on. Don't worry about this, but if I move it out, you can see that what's going to happen is it's going to cut along that edge. My edges happen to be coincident, so it still works, but it'll cut along where the intersection is between the surfaces of the box and the surfaces of the subtractive box. So split is the command, select the object to split, hit the object you want to cut with, hit enter, and then turn it off, and you can delete those surfaces to see through it. So now, I'm trying to keep this all wrapped up in one thought for you. Because really the only one you need to know at this point is just split. But we're talking about Boolean functions. Where do they become powerful? So Boolean functions become powerful when you do have a solid. So take a look at, oh wait, does it have to be bigger? I forget. No, it should work. All right, so we should be able to offset surface. So if you go to offset SRF, that's for offset surface. and then you select the box, hit enter, and you'll see a bunch of arrows show up. I'm not explaining every little thing about this. I'm only explaining what you need to know, and then we'll explain more as we go along, okay? So for those of you who are, wanting a little bit more about it, the ones you need to know here is the distance. So the distance for me is going to be 1 foot for now. And no, I'll make it 6 inches actually. So you click on distance and you change the value. The other thing that you need to do here is flip the arrows to the inside. So you go to flip all, and now your offset surface is going to create thickness on that surface to the inside of your box. And when you hit enter, it looks like that.
So should we first make an offset and then split it all over?
Not split. That's a good question. So
now we can have it Boolean, right?
Yeah, now you can do Boolean. Right, thank you.
So first making the offset, so we don't need it to erase the bottom.
You don't need to, but we did for this purpose so that you could see that it.
What's going on?
Yeah. So if you didn't make that cut and you took the bottom off and then you did offset surface and you made it thick before you did the Boolean at the one that I just cut, it would work like this. It would show up like this.
We need to have it kind of like
Yeah, you have to have a non-continuous solid form in order for it to work. It's a little confusing. But anyway, this is the process. Just imagine that you need to have a cut in your box in order to create thickness and then use Booleans. And Booleans are more powerful because if I take, and I'll show you here on these subtractions, so that still lives there. But now on these subtractions, I'll show you the difference now between when you have thickness on your wall and you do a split and when you have thickness on your wall and you do Boolean. Okay, so first off, I'm going to try just splitting it again. So I select the object I want to split, I hit enter, select the cutting object, which is that, and I hit enter. So when I turn this off, I now have two surfaces I can delete, and you think it's all going to be well and good, but then, there's another layer of surfaces. And then those surfaces don't have edges, so now it's like this empty, weird thing that doesn't have a face. Undoing split. So this is what you want to do. After you've cut a hole in a plane surface, you then create your thickness, and then you go to the rest of your objects and you can do a Boolean difference, which now the result is using the same steps. Select the object, hit enter, select the object's multiple that you want to cut out and hit enter, and it automatically cuts them with thickness, creates the interior face, and you're good to go on any cut throughout the entire surface of the object. So
you use the distance as 6?
What's that?
Distance was 6 inches?
Yeah, I made the thickness 6 inches. So, guys, can I bring you in here for a second? I spoke a lot in a really long train of thought, but it's not that hard to download because I only gave you 2 things. Well, 3 things technically. I gave you split, I gave you offset surface, and I gave you Boolean difference. The only thing that you need to recall out of all of that, a lot of talking, is that first you need to split to cut a hole in the original object. Then you offset surface to create thickness. Then you can use Boolean difference to cut any hole you want in that new thickened surface. That's it.
Do you still need to erase the bottom, or is that not, does that not come into the equation at all? I'm just confused about that. 'Cause
The bottom?
Yeah. Like,
Oh,
matter?
I was showing you that. Oh, thank you. Yeah. So the reason I took off the bottom was that I was showing you that even though you might have a hole in your form if you're using split, well, I guess I sort of did it out of order. So if you have a hole and you do a Boolean function on a flat surface, it's still going to try and carve it out. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but just for the process you just outlined, the split offset.
Yeah.
You don't need to.
You don't need to, yeah, that's an intermediary step that I did so that you can visualize what's happening. In order to get to this result, you don't have to take the bottom off. You just have to split and have at least one hole.
So we have to exclude it, right?
No.
Because I cannot do it in the opposite.
Okay. All right, so let me go back. So I'll explain it real quick, and I'm going to keep it in the video so that you guys have this, right? So I'm going to keep going all the way back, and then I'll show you what I mean. So all the way back to where I took the bottom out. Okay, so this is the bottom. I exploded it, and I took it off. The only reason I took that off was so that I can show you that when you go up to the top and you split it versus Boolean, split will cut a hole, Boolean will try to carve it out and create a new surface inside, even though you have a hole already in it. The result that you want is to have a hole in it, regardless of whether or not you have the bottom. You can take the bottom off and then create your thickness, and then Boolean difference to get this result. But if your process is not to take the bottom off, the point I'm getting at is you still have to cut that box in order to get an offset surface to work properly, to be able to do your Boolean difference and then start cutting the rest of them out.
Wait, so we have to take the bottom off?
You don't have to. I only did that illustratively to prove a point that you can split, and or rather you can take the bottom off or cut a hole or split it or do whatever, and then if you try to do Boolean on a flat surface, not thickened, it will still try to recreate. I'll show you again.
So
So
offset is supposed to have a cut.
I'll show you again here. So I took the bottom off, and I've got a solid form, and if I try to do Boolean difference, and I select this object and then I select that object, that's what happens. Even though I have a hole in my form. Now, what I can do is before I do the Boolean difference, I can select this object, say offset surface to the inside. Now when I do Boolean, it'll work, right? Offset SRF. I set it to 6 inches. Okay, so I don't think there are any more video critical questions here. I'll come around and troubleshoot with you and clarify any individual questions you might have.